Welcome to the Monday, October 5th Lake County School Board Special School Board meeting. We'll begin with a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance led by Mr. Matthias.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and welcome back. Our first item on the agenda is public input. I believe we have one public input in person.
Yes, Mrs. Cronin. You know the drill.
Good morning, Superintendent and board members. Thought I'd come in today to say good morning to you. Sometimes out of sight, out of mind. But I did want to also let you know that I feel as though one of your top priorities, being the largest business and largest employer in Lake County, is that you need to look at how you're going to pay your employees. On the ballot this year is a $10 minimum. Do you know how many employees do not make $10 an hour that work for the district? So have you given any thought to that? Over the last 2 months, you've lost over 160 employees have quit. Not even retired. I didn't count the retirees. We have never had that many employees quit. And I know COVID's going on, but that isn't the reason why. They could have taken a leave of absence if that was the case. You know, they're out there, they're looking for better jobs. I just wanted to give you that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cronin. All right, 3.01 is legislative priorities with Gray Robinson, Superintendent.
So we're thrilled to have our representatives from Gray Robinson here this morning. Angie Langley is here, and Robert Stewart is about 3 minutes away or
yes.
2 minutes away.
So I don't know if you want to go to the next item or if that's a long item or if you want to wait.
Well, we can go ahead, I think, and start some discussion. I know you wanted to provide us some highlights and lowlights of this past legislative session and some of the work that you all did on our behalf, and then just engaged in some discussion about what the expectation would be moving forward in regards to our legislative priorities, some recommendations on what we can anticipate in the upcoming session. So if Robert is the one to do that discussion, then
he's gonna have most of that, and I can't remember if he sent.
I don't think he sent anything over that we need to have. Do we have Mr. Mock here?
Well, then the next item is just the ingenuity. That should go pretty quickly, right?
We'll go quickly.
Doesn't seem like we'd spend a long time on that one. For Hope Forest.
Oh, I see.
Okay. Yeah, there are 2 action items that we can go ahead and move to.
You can sit there.
Okay.
Thank you.
So moving on to action item 3.01 with Dr. Weisskopf.
Actually,
3.02.
Sorry, 3.02 with Dr. Weisskopf.
This item was actually on the agenda as an emergency item last week at our regular meeting, and we neglected to take action on it and actually call for a vote on that one when it actually should have occurred under discussion. And so I am recommending approval of the agreement with Edgenuity to extend the services to Hope Forest Academy. That is our DJJ site. They are in need of that additional online support.
So moved.
second.
First and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Moving to 3.03, actionable item with Mr. Johnson.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the item number 3 has to do with the policy relating to attendance at board meetings and use of electronic media. We discussed at our last meeting that the governor's deadline for the ability to have a quorum without 3 members being present was about to expire. That has been extended. You want to do that first? That has been extended, so now we have another month. the way that it was written leads us to believe that this might be the last extension that the governor is going to have. So we were asked to look at moving forward with what possibilities we had to allow for the use of electronic media for the board for attendance at meetings. In order to do that, we had come up with the idea that we would need to pass an emergency motion because of the timelines of how we would have to, excuse me, not an emergency motion, it's an emergency policy. There is a distinction in our policy between the two. But we would have a time period in between when the next expiration of the governor's order came up and our institution of a new policy would come up because of the advertising requirements. So the way we think best to be able to have an opportunity to look at it and get something in place before the next expiration of the deadline by the governor is to move forward today with the adoption of the emergency policy, which really goes back and to a great extent reiterates the policy that we had in place before Neola modified our policy. It would allow, and I don't have mine with me. Do you have that? Thank you. It would allow, first of all, it would require a quorum to be physically present to be able to continue the meeting. But it would allow other members to participate and vote through the use of electronic media under 5 circumstances. 1, when the board member is away from the district attending to district business. 2 is when the board member is confined to home or hospital due to illness or accident. 3 is when the board member's absence is due to a death or serious illness of an immediate family member. And I'm going to skip the next one for a second and go to 5, when extraordinary circumstances cause the board member to be unable to attend the school board meeting in person. And that request, that last one, number 5, requires approval by a majority vote of the other board members. Those are essentially what we had with a little modification previously in the old policy. What we've added is number 4, is that when COVID-19 consideration cause an undue burden for board members' attendance in person at a school board meeting. Now, I will tell you that it hasn't been clearly stated by the Attorney General anything other than they expect you to operate under the previous sunshine law requirements. And the potential issue that comes up is the issue of whether or not you can have board members not physically present vote. I don't think it's that much of an issue that they can attend the meeting and participate, but it's the voting that becomes the issue. I will tell you that the policy that we had before was a policy that I drafted years ago to change so that we could use electronic media. And at the time we did that policy, to put things in perspective, we had an issue of what we were going to use for the electronic media because we didn't have speaker phones that would accommodate that kind of communication between people who are here and people who are somewhere else, a two-way communication. Well, electronic technology has progressed a little bit since that time. And now, especially with the equipment that we have today, there's very little difference between participating online and participating in person. We are not the only ones who are looking at this issue of the voting. I think everyone is going to maintain that in order to have a meeting, you have to have 3 board members physically present in one location. So that's not going to change. The issue is the other 2 board members. Here we now are going to have 5 reasons why they can opt to utilize electronic media, which are the issues I think that come up most of the time. I think this covers all of them. We have that and everything else we can handle public input the way you want to. There's no prohibition about receiving public input online or over the telephone or anywhere else that you want to do it, or when you want to do it as part of the meeting to be present or part of the meeting not to be present. I think we put on here that public participation was governed by, that's the Neola policy, and that Neola policy, I think, was the one that allows them to, members of the public to provide input in person. So what we have is an emergency policy. It's kind of redundant because the governor hasn't eliminated his emergency order yet. So we're proceeding under that. This is going to be there to cover the week or two that could happen between when we can get another policy implemented, a regular policy, which we're required to do in 60 days when we pass an emergency policy. So this will cover that gap that will come up between the end of the month and when we can get a policy in place. So anybody have any questions about any of that?
By board member participation, does this also cover committees that are sunshine, like the audit committee, for example?
Yes. Except we did have this discussion, Mr. Mathias. I still think it would be better and safer about it. So anyone who would raise an issue about how we're doing things, that if any of the committees are really not operating as a sunshine committee, or really not providing recommendations to the board from the committee, but are performing other tasks, then those, rather than identify what issues that might come up because of people attending by electronic media, we ought to change what the purpose of those committees is, so that it opens up them, it opens up them to do a wide variety of other things without having to worry about sunshine law.
My only question about the voting issue, well, I guess that's I don't know exactly how to address the voting thing. So is there some action the board could take to state that if we were to have a vote with two people virtual, that or one person virtual, that the vote would stand or something?
No, I mean, you're going to have the vote. It depends on whether there's an issue with the sunshine law of that vote being counted. Because, and the whole thing comes down, Dr. Burns, to an argument over what's present.
Okay.
And the Attorney General, I think one of the Attorney General's opinion goes into a discussion of the definitions in the dictionary of what present means. Present may have been an argument 15 years ago when the other policy was passed, but the ability to be present and participate in this meeting seems, with the electronic media that we have now, seems to be no difference between you being present here and you being present sitting in a chair at the podium. And
I just
again,
don't want
it's
there to
not
be a
just for
controversial vote.
It's not just for anything. I mean, it has to be one of these reasons, and these reasons have to be followed very closely. So it's not, this is not we're not going to pay any attention to the sunshine law anymore. No, the sunshine law has always allowed some exceptions for these circumstances. The Attorney General, there's a couple of opinions that specifically allows for exceptions for this to happen. Is it more conservative, and will you get into no trouble at all with the sunshine if you don't allow people to vote who are participating who aren't present? Yes. That's the most conservative approach. But is it a realistic approach these days, given the fact that with electronic communication, it's the same as people being present at the meeting?
Okay, I understand. Any other comments?
So this policy is only in place if the governor's order is not. So the governor's order would allow a vote to still occur even if there's not a quorum of board members in the room. Is that right?
Right, and we don't know what's going to happen between now. One of the things we could possibly do, because we'll have the time to do it, and it might be in conjunction with a couple of other counties who I understand are going the same way, is to request an Attorney General's opinion. From the Attorney General, we can get some feedback before we even have to institute this policy.
All right. Two more questions. Next one is, when would the vote occur from the board members to decide whether or not to permit the board members' extraordinary circumstances?
It would occur I would assume it would occur at the beginning of the meeting.
At that meeting. So that board member may not know whether or not they're going to be
Right.
counted until then. But I think this is a pretty level-headed group to begin with. And then last question is about the time frame for accepting the public input requests. I think this was probably written to refer to a 6 o'clock meeting, but clearly in this case, we are meeting at 9:30 in the morning, so somebody would not be able to send a request at 4 p.m. on the day of the board meeting. So should we change that to be like maybe 2 hours prior to the board meeting, or is that the intention?
I agree with that.
That's just a matter of, I don't know how administratively that's held, so however that would,
Whatever time is do you, how much, I guess it depends on how much notice you need. Is it 1 hour, is it 2 hours, is it?
That we've been doing for workshops, and it just inadvertently didn't get added to the final copy, but so Natalie and I had already discussed that, and
Okay.
it should be on there. I think for workshops, it's due the day before, the business day before the workshop, so that it can be ready for the 9:30 workshop.
Why does it take so long for someone to get queued up on the public input? Why couldn't they do it an hour before or whatever? Why would they have to,
That would be a
Yes.
Friday before Monday.
maybe a Friday before Monday?
Yeah.
I think part of the reason that we weren't having it, immediate, like somebody 30 minutes before, 15 minutes before, was because we have them in a waiting room.
Right.
And I think Dr. Weisskopf needs to know who's in the waiting room, what their phone number or their email, whatever, so she can identify that it's a person who is supposed to be led into the meeting, so we can avoid kind of the Zoom bombing and that sort of thing that people were having early on. So that was just kind of giving us an opportunity to be able to check that.
Does someone request on Friday to be on this meeting, and then in the morning, they log in and they're validated?
Right, so they make a request on Friday in the morning or either late Friday, depending on when we get it. We will send them the link so that they know where to go. Then in the morning, they can log on, come into the link, and they're in a waiting room. And then there's a process where Dr. Weisskopf or whoever is kind of driving the ship that day takes a look to make sure that the people in the waiting room match the people that we said, that requested. And then we let them in, so that we aren't letting people in that have not already been screened.
Does it need to be a Friday, though? Could it not be a 6 o'clock on Monday morning for a workshop?
It could be 6 o'clock on Monday morning, but I don't know that anybody's working it.
Well, they made the request, so as soon as whoever the designee is that
Yeah.
is the gatekeeper could come in and look at them and send them the link, right, when they come into work.
Like they might not get the link till 8 or 8:30 or whatever it is,
But they're going to speak, though.
But they'll be able to speak because they've got the request in by that morning.
Correct.
Would that be a big deal? The Friday lag seems.
Yeah. I think it could happen on a Monday morning. So for instance, today was 9:30. So if we had set it for, say, 7, I think there are some people who do get in early, about 7:30. And then we could make sure that they had the link and that we verify before letting them in at 9:30.
Well, what time is someone here on a Monday? Natalie? 7:30? That seems like the magic number to me. You'd have to be in by 7:30. And then that gives you 2 hours to process it, or whatever you do.
Yeah, that could work, yes.
My only thought on that is if it was a meeting where we anticipated, like the meeting where we discussed coronavirus for 9 hours, and we had a lot of public input, that might be a meeting where the time frame would change. And I like that people can come in, so please don't misunderstand, but I want to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a position where we can't process all those requests by 7:30 on a Monday. And I don't know if it can be flexible, where if it's something that we anticipate a lot of public speaking, I don't know what that looks
But
like.
the processing is merely sending the link, right?
Well, and then verifying that that's who is in the room. when they actually log in.
I think they check on the phone number.
To make sure it's the right person. So we had some issues with Zoom that as a society in the beginning, where people were coming in that weren't supposed to be there.
If we have something controversial, maybe we have more than one person on that issue
That could work too.
verifying. I mean,
I'm
to
just
be
trying, like,
consistent.
I feel like we're like flipping like really fast and we don't know the unintended consequences. So I was just trying to process what could possibly happen. And if we had, like, even when we discussed having guardians, like those types of topics, we might get overwhelmed, which is great because I would love the opportunity for more people to voice their concerns, but I just don't want us to be on a Monday morning trying to process.
But we
200
also are
people.
advocating that with technology,
Yeah.
that this is the quicker median,
Yeah,
and yet we're saying we need
We're
3 days.
probably
to
okay
process
on
it.
most Monday mornings.
it is okay
right?
most Monday mornings. I don't think it's going to be a problem typically
But maybe we adjust if it becomes a
if it
problem.
becomes a problem. I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure
Right.
we're aware.
You okay with it?
Well, we had some comments earlier when we first started this about people, I forgot, I can't speak because I didn't get my thing in by 4 o'clock on Friday. So I think you're on the right page. They're allowing a little bit more time for them to get it in because they may not be able to get it in by 4 o'clock on Friday. And their time normally ends at 4 o'clock here on Fridays. So it means that they would not come back until Monday morning to pick up whatever else has came in during that time.
Well, it's consistent with how we're treating the board meetings, which is 4 o'clock for a 6 o'clock board meeting.
Mhm.
We do the 7:30 for a 9:30 workshop. Seems pretty consistent to me then.
That's right.
Yes, I think that could work. I think what Ms. Luke said is legit as well. And we make adjustments perhaps when
If it comes up,
we
I'm
have those
perfectly
type
fine
of
with
I'm
that.
fine with that.
All right,
All right.
very good.
No further questions.
Okay,
Well,
can we go
Policy-
forward?
Can I ask one question real quickly? I know this is just a 60-day emergency policy, but the policy itself wouldn't be specific to COVID-19. I'm wondering if it shouldn't be like a global pandemic or a, do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Okay,
And we can put that in the
policy,
policy and hope nothing else comes up
Right.
between now
Because-
and then.
right.
Even in a case of a hurricane or something of that nature, there may need to be virtual as well.
That's a good point.
That's a good point.
This, again, this is just the emergency policy.
Right, that's why I said
It's
that. I
actually,
just
it's
wanted to make
90,
sure.
it's 90 days.
Okay.
in
90.
The statute. The policy that's going to come before you, we were waiting until we saw the feedback from this workshop, but it says during a declared state of emergency.
Perfect.
And then I think number 4 says state of emergency or pandemic, something like that. So it is a more generic.
So that'd be good.
So are we voting on this one today? As an
Yes.
actionable
Yes, you are, but we need to clarify the
language?
participation from public input. It sounded like you said 2 hours before the meeting,
That's it.
whichever kind of meeting, whether it's a regular meeting or the other meeting.
That's right.
Okay.
Mhm.
Then we'd like to include that as part of any recommendation to approve it, that we make that modification to the policy.
I'd move that we approve this policy.
Superintendent
Amended.
gets the,
Oh, the superintendent has to do it?
Makes a
she
recommendation.
makes some
Oh,
recommendations.
I thought we were doing it. Well, then you just go right on.
You make the motions. She makes the recommendations.
Yeah, I know, I got ahead of myself a little bit.
I recommend approval of the adoption of the emergency policy 2020-01
With the language.
with the amendments as discussed previously.
So moved.
Very good.
Second.
First and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Very good. Are we ready to go back to 3.01?
We are ready to go back to 3.01. Good morning and welcome, Robert.
Is Robert speaking?
I am.
Yeah, you-
Okay.
I have a green light.
There you
Oh,
go.
there we go. Now it's on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Robert Stewart with Gray Robinson. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Angie Langley, who you know here locally and helps us as we represent you up in Tallahassee. And so great to be with all of you today. What I wanted to do, and first of all, let me apologize for being late. That was not my intention. Orlando traffic got the best of me as I was getting out of downtown. But what I wanted to do today is quickly kind of run through some of the things we worked on last year, or this year, I should say, this past session. Talk a little bit about what to expect as we look ahead to the 2021 session. and kind of walk through some of those issues that we see as being important leading into 2021. And then I think with the superintendent's permission, kind of open it up to questions or feedback that y'all have as you begin to develop your 2021 legislative agenda. So for starters, I think the big win for this past session was the HVAC program at Umatilla High School in partnership with Lake Tech that got $500,000. And we did that. We talk a lot in our previous sessions about always trying to run a parallel track on funding options, one through the legislature and one through administrative, gubernatorial, grant opportunities that might exist. This is one where we quite literally were putting in our legislative budget request at the very beginning of session when we found out through the governor's grant program on workforce training initiatives that that particular request had been funded through that workforce training grant. And we did not have to go forward with the legislative budget request, which at the time felt like a great thing because legislative requests are volatile anyway. Turns out it was even more fortuitous because had we gotten it funded, and I'll talk about vetoes in a moment, but that entire line item of special education projects at the district level, which is where this would have been funded had we gotten it, all those got whacked in the veto process, which had we been vetoed, you can't go after agency funds for a full year if you have a project get vetoed. So all the more fortuitous that we got funded because, again, I'm not sure that we would have survived the veto pen regardless of how worthwhile the project was, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Another win in the midst of session was CareerSource Florida had amended their list of certifications that they paid for, or that there was reimbursement available to the district for. Ms. Cornegie called us, I think it was late one night during session, when the list had been released, and many of the certifications offered in Lake County were removed from the list of sort of approved ones. Within a matter of hours, we had Michelle Denard, the CEO of CareerSource Florida, on the phone and working and then kind of connecting her staff with y'all's staff and being able to get those back on the list by the time the final one was released. That was kind of the first list was sort of the proposed one that was going to the CareerSource board. And then ultimately we had all those that we needed back on the list, put back on by the time it reached the final vote of the board. And Michelle, as always, was great to work with. And then the last big one that I'll mention is the compression allocation. Once again, working in partnership with other districts that are similarly situated to Lake County where you fall below the statewide average. There was some fear during the midst of session that they were going to not do the compression allocation this year. Not only was the compression allocation funded, but there was also the hold harmless money, and you've probably learned a lot about that. The funds that are drawn down in the FEFP for this year, but that equaled about $1.7 million between the compression and the hold harmless for Lake County, so another win. Looking ahead to next session, as I think about that issue, we are, of course, losing the greatest champion, one of the greatest champions of the compression allocation in Rob Bradley, who from Clay County is similarly situated to us. He will be, knock on wood, replaced by his wife in the Florida Senate. So we'll maintain that level of support, but she won't be the budget chair. We do expect that Kelly Stargell of your delegation is going to have a major role in appropriations. Not sure exactly what that role will be yet, but a major role in the appropriations process in the Senate. And of course, we no longer have Jennifer Sullivan, who has departed the legislature to be with her husband in Texas. You'll have a new member representing your district here, but she remains a friend. And in fact, we called her not too long ago about an issue that came up, which I'll also talk about. But looking ahead to next year, there's going to be more work to be done on the compression allocation. Obviously, we're going to have Kelly, who's been a champion, but we're going to need to work on new champions in the House, and in partnership with those other similarly situated districts, we'll be doing exactly that. Looking at a couple of other issues that came up, let me do that first, and then I'll talk about the vetoes. The most recent one, and the one that I mentioned about talking with Jennifer Sullivan about, was buried within an otherwise sort of innocuous local government bill during last session, was the creation of a new way of scoring it was a speaker priority, but a new way of scoring cities and counties on things like their tax structure, their business friendliness, and education. And when they did that, they did not use the same metrics for grading school districts that the Department of Education uses, which is pretty well laid out in statute, and there's significant input and data that goes into that. As a result, Lake County, under this particular metric, which was not, I think, fairly distributed for the good job that you guys are doing here, unfortunately rated Lake County in a way that was not reflective of your schools. Now, that's not been a widely broadcast thing. It's buried on a website that the Florida House of Representatives controls. And it was something that had passed the House, never even considered in the Senate, the creation of this website or this Florida Taxpayer Accountability something, TFA, whatever, I forget the acronym. And so the House just decided, because it was a speaker priority, they were just going to do it. And so they just created this on the House website. It's a subset of the House website. And so it's out there. We immediately jumped on sort of finding out how they came about these metrics, the data that they used, or more importantly didn't use, to come up with it. And ultimately that led, I think other districts began reaching out as well shortly after we did, and that led to a frequently asked questions section being added to the website that at least explains the methodologies used to come up with this. Again, it was a House deal, it was a House priority. They have certainly the authority to put whatever they want on their website and score things however they want, but at least there's more context to it now, which, and I'll give all the credit to Ms. Cornegie. She found it, she called immediately, and we were able to jump on it and at least create some context for how those things are measured. But the most important one, obviously, is the DOE one. This new rating that the House came up with has no bearing on your school grade or your district grades or your funding, that kind of stuff. This is just an added piece of information that the House wanted out there in the marketplace. Going back and talking a little bit about the veto list and the budget, of course, the legislature needed to extend by a couple of days to come back and vote on the final budget. In doing so, that they came back sort of in the midst of the start of the pandemic. No public was allowed back into the Capitol at that time. I think they came back on the 16th or the 18th of March, right after everything began shutting down. And when they voted on that budget, it sat for quite literally till the very end of June. The governor finally exercised his power of line item veto after, several months into the pandemic, sort of figuring out where things were, having received the CARES allocation from the federal government, and then $1 billion in vetoes, which is by far the largest that's ever been done in Florida. And the vetoes were, I think the best word for them is indiscriminate. They didn't follow political lines. They didn't follow district lines. They didn't follow whether the project originated in the House or the Senate. It was just, I don't know if anybody watches Game of Thrones. I don't. But the governor, the day before his veto list was released, he referenced that it was going to look like the Red Wedding from Game of Thrones. I didn't know what that reference meant, but a quick Google search told me all I needed to know. It was painful, to say the least. And that $1 billion, the way vetoes work in Florida, you may be aware of this, so forgive me if it's redundant. The way vetoes work in Florida is if a project is vetoed, those funds revert to general revenue. And so the logic behind the massive amount of vetoes was the need to create more general revenue flexibility to spend on shortfalls that were going to come as a result of the pandemic. And so with the roughly $4.5, $5 billion that the state had from CARES, with the $4 billion in reserves, and then $1 billion in vetoes, there was an additional $5 billion on top of the CARES that was now created for the state to use as needed during the months ahead, which we're now very much in. Today, the state continues to sit on a few $1 billion in CARES Act money that hasn't been distributed down to the local governments. It's the state's portion. I think all of the money that needs to go down to the locals has either been allocated or it's on its way to being allocated once those funds are encumbered at the local level. But the state, now I'm thinking the Tallahassee level, continues to sit on a few $1 billion, hoping and expecting that there's going to be relief provided by the federal government, either through the Department of Treasury or by the Congress, to spend the money more flexibly. Right now, it's the black letter of the CARES Act law is pretty clear. You can only spend it on COVID-related costs incurred in fighting the pandemic, basically. I'm overly generalizing it, but it's very, very limited. Since April, the governor, the speaker, the president have patiently, the president of the Senate, have patiently waited for that guidance to come to allow them to use the money on budget stabilization at the state and maybe even the local levels, but certainly the state level being their top priority, to be able to plug holes that were created as a result of COVID in the state's budget. That permission has still not come. It may come after the election. It may come in the form of another round of with the HEROES Act or the HELP Act, or the two that are floating around Washington right now. There may be flexibility provided within those pieces of legislation, but we still continue to wait on that. And so there's a few $1 billion basically sitting in escrow in Tallahassee waiting for some of that flexibility. Reading the political tea leaves of Washington, I can tell you that if there was a way for the president or for the Congress to only provide that kind of flexibility to states like Florida, I think we would have already gotten it. Their fear politically is that states like Illinois, New York, California will take that flexibility and budget stabilization and just plug their pension hole. And they don't want that. I think understandably, or you can read why the politics of that would be that they wouldn't want states to do that. But it's that fear that states will use the money in that way that's keeping states like Florida that have legitimate holes in the current year funding of the budget being able to have that flexibility. So keep an eye on that. That's kind of the big, in addition to will there be more local government support, will there be another CARES Act, the big unanswered question of that is what happens with that flexibility. Special session is sort of the rumor du jour in Tallahassee circles. There was some thought that they try to do one before the election. I think at this point it's very clear that's not going to happen. The latest is that they may convene in organizational session. So every year, every 2 years after the election, there's an organizational session that takes place 2 weeks after. So mid-November, mid to late November. And that organizational session is usually pomp and circumstance. It's literally organizing. It's swearing in the members in a formal way. It's announcing the committee structures. It's meeting in committee and sort of introducing yourselves and saying, here's the role that this committee is going to play over the next 2 years. There's some thought now that they may convene in special session as a result at that same time to allocate some of these funds, either funds that they currently need to spend, that they're just needing legislative approval on, and or if they get this flexibility, spending some of the money then as well. So be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, the calendar would be such that, in a non-pandemic world, the calendar would be after an election, organizational session, 1, maybe 2 weeks of committee meetings in December, at least 2 weeks of committee meetings in January, 3 in February, the middle of which is almost always dedicated solely to the budget. So February, 2 on policy, 1 on budget. And then session begins early this year, early for March. It's the first Tuesday after the first Monday in March. I think this year is the 2nd. So it starts about as early as it can in March. And then it'll run through April 30th. And we'll be back, hopefully, to normal sometime after that. So as we think about what session's going to look like, and then I want to kind of steer this into talking about some of your priorities, and I know at least one of them that we're going to talk about that I'll mention. This session is going to be all COVID all the time. Every year seems to have its own flavor, its own topic that drives the rest of the discussion. There's no question of what this year's is going to be. We're not waiting for the unknown to happen for us to know what's going to drive the issues. It's going to be all COVID, and that's going to be everything from economic recovery and what policy or budget looks like around economic recovery. You can rest assured that there will be something on the unemployment compensation system, which obviously got a lot of attention and continues to get a lot of attention. Education issues. The Department of Education just released their legislative budget request the other day. You may have seen Some of the highlights of that there's I think it's I have a note here, I think it's a $10 increase in the BSA that they're proposing. They're budgeting for roughly 30,000 more students throughout the state, which is slightly below a typical growth, but they're projecting the growth will kind of return as kids get more comfortable and families get more comfortable returning to the classroom. $500 million for the continue and the teacher raise, so that money will continue to flow, again, according to their LBR. $180 million for safe schools. There's a lot in that to unpack, and again, it's just a request. The legislature will ultimately make the decision on those legislative budget issues. One final thing on the vetoes. Again, I think it's safe to say, and Ms. Cornigan and I talked about this, I think it's safe to say that, had we been funded on a special appropriation, I think we know where that would have ended. So really, really good news that we were able to get it through the grant program. Other things vetoed, as the governor was counting up to $1 billion, $41 million for the Guardian program, for the training, was vetoed. The Complete Florida Plus program, this was maybe the biggest surprise on the veto list, was $29 million. That is funded through the University of West Florida, but it's basically the state's online library. And it's used by K-12, state colleges, state universities. That money completely wiped, and as a result, the state colleges and state universities have sort of patchworked together a one-year solution to get through the year in the hopes that that can be restored next year. One of the other clients that we have the privilege of working with is the Florida Library Association, and this just caught everybody by surprise. I mean, nobody even thought, it's been in the budget for so long, nobody even thought to effectively lobby on it. This was supposed to be safe, and it serves so many tens of thousands of students at all levels of education. So that's one to certainly be watching next year as they begin to try to get that back. Yeah, and I think just looking ahead to next year, the issues are funding. There's the discussion of the hold harmless provisions that were in this year's, and I know one of the topics that we want to talk about is on the, and I'll end with this and then open up to any questions, or I'd love, Angie, if I missed anything, is that hold harmless provision for the assessments as it relates to district, school, teacher grades. That is, the Commissioner of Education has expressed some interest in having that conversation. The legislature really hasn't weighed in on it yet. I do think it'll be a popular topic as we sort of get back to some semblance of normalcy over the next several months. And certainly the way that we provide education, as you can see just by looking around us, is very different today. And so having that year, another year of grace, probably makes some good sense, and we'll see kind of where that conversation goes. And so with that, that's sort of an overview from at least my perspective of where we've been, where we're going, and I'd love your thoughts or questions that you might have as we look ahead to 2021. Angie, did I miss anything?
I was just trying to look up the date of the designated Lake County legislative days, and I believe it's in the middle of February that has, because I just wanted to make sure that was on your calendars, but I will find that before the end of this and bring that up.
Can I ask you specifically about safety and security and the Guardian dollars? The 41K was for our district?
No, it was 41 million statewide.
41 million.
Yeah, it was that was the training money for the Guardian program.
And since that is mandated that we have safety and security, then what are we supposed to do?
That is the $41 million question statewide of what do you do with the training of new guardians without the funds. I don't know how much of that would have flowed to us. I don't know what our percentage of that might have been, but that is a major question coming out of the veto list. Again, that's probably another one that folks didn't see coming.
When you mention about the veto list, so you're then saying that we can't ask for it because you have to wait a year?
Well, a statewide program like that might be a little bit different, and this is gonna be somewhat of an educated guess, so forgive me on it. The way the rules work in the traditional sense is if a special project, let's assume that we had gotten the HVAC program through the legislative process. We got $500,000 from the legislature, and it was vetoed. We would not be allowed to go to the Department of Education, where that money would have come from, and ask for it for a year. A statewide program like this is a bit different because the money would have been distributed either formulaically or as folks were trained and you sought that reimbursement. That may be different, but I don't know from what pot of money the department would even reimburse, given that the line item was vetoed. But we can seek that out for you, Bill, and ask the department what options might exist there.
You could speak into your microphone. I just gotta.
These dollars didn't come to the district anyway. They actually went to the sheriff's department.
That actually sounds right, yeah, because they're the ones that would train. That's right.
I would like to see us add that to our priorities. The safety is done now. These are our lists.
Got it.
We're gonna talk about them, but yeah.
That we're going to be talking about.
Can I clarify that the increase in base student allocation planned is $10? Was that $10?
That's what was in the Department of Education's LBR that was released a couple of days ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that enough
That-
to cover the teacher compensation? Because my understanding was that would roll into the BSA so that we would then continue to fund the raises that we give out this year, right?
So the $500 million for the raises is also in there. My understanding of the BSA, the $10 increase to the BSA is on top of that.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
And then I want to speak just for a second about equity compression. And so you say that it was $1.7 million this year?
The Lake County share of the compression and the hold harmless, they combined those in the same line item this year, was 1.75. That sound right?
Our first year was 2.8, and the next year was 2.3. So while we were compressing, we were going in the wrong direction in our little compression, because it's actually $12 million for equity.
I know.
And is there any spirit to make it permanent, rather than us fighting this every year?
The desire of the Senate has been to make it permanent. The House has not wanted to do that, at least not the last few years. I think there's always a chance for that discussion, and we, along with other districts that are similarly situated, have tried to lead that, to say this is not a problem that's going away. It's not a year-by-year problem. It's a full equity problem. So I think yes, asking for it to be permanent continues to be the desire. I admittedly today don't know where the House is going to stand on that looking forward. It's going to depend on who's in the particular chairs of appropriations and education policy.
When does it, because it's Florida statute, I think 1011.62, that calls for there to be equal education. At what point do we speak specifically about the equity and that they're violating their own law? I mean, I know you guys are like schmoozing and trying to move it, but at what point do we ramp up more?
Do you mean sue?
I mean sue, yes.
Yeah, I'm going to defer that question to your legal counsel.
Well, that's nuclear, by the way, Dr. Burns, but still, I've only been trying to get this done for 8 years, so I'm a little frustrated.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Sounds like a very interesting conversation I'd like to have at some point.
Right.
Right. I wanted to ask, I feel like in this sort of COVID environment where everything is kind of chaotic, that education was floating, especially within our county, education was really floating to the top with economics. People were really recognizing the important economic driver that education is in our county, especially. And I just really want you guys to focus on bringing education to the top of the discussions as they continue, and maybe as we find out who, maybe you guys could come back after election, I was thinking, so we could talk in specifics with people, perhaps, like maybe that would be more helpful after election sometime to have like another session. I don't know. But specifically, I wanted to look anywhere we can look at increasing educational vocation at the high school level, workforce, all of those things, because I'm hoping those will float to the top of the conversations, as opposed to just plugging holes, if that makes sense, as we look towards a post-COVID future. Any other comments, board?
Well, I do have some comments about some of the
Right.
wording of things here, but I guess if we're just throwing topics out, one that's not here that we did have some discussion over the last couple of years is about directory information and in our learning about where the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations lands versus what Florida's Sunshine Law calls for, that in the Federal Code of Regulations, that an educational agency can specify the groups that will give the directory information to and for what purposes. So that gives us a little more picking and choosing. But the Sunshine Law of this, or the public records laws of this, don't allow us to make that distinction. So that's where Florida and the federal codes kind of part ways. And in the interest of protecting students and their safety, this one is high for me, that I'd really like us to have more, be more in line with the federal code of regulations. It's just bizarre to me that somebody could walk into a school and say, I want the names and addresses and phone numbers of all your kids. And we'll turn that over under Florida public records laws. But the federal code allows us to say, well, what purpose would that be for?
Are we discussing ours now too? I know that I wanted to
That's
give
what we
them
just
the
went to.
opportunity. I just wanted to make sure that that's where we went to. And so
Yes,
as we kind of
please.
consider these, I know that like the first one still has the best and brightest and those types of references in them to clarify. But before we started to kind of chunk through these, I was thinking that especially in light of what we know is going to happen with plugging holes and lack of funding, that we consider like picking two. Like I know we've carried these lists forward, and you guys have carried these lists forward, and it's like hit or miss. But I feel like this year specifically, the more direct we can get, like these are our three or these are our two. I feel like that's going to carry more water than if we go up with a 2-page list and say these are the things that we need. Like if we can show that the funding is obviously a significant concern. I don't see why yours would be an issue to talk about it. There's not really funding attached to it that I see, right? It's not a funding piece. And then I know we've got the couple to consider in regards to the count, the FTE, hold harmless would be significant. And I also feel like the reading endorsement is a big one too. That's a great one to put on here. I just don't know if there's a way for us to narrow so that we can go up there, really fight hard for these couple.
Well, I think if there are
Sorry.
times when you're faced with as a board, that if there aren't any dollars available, that then you fight for language changes.
Yeah.
And just like language that Dodd just mentioned, that
It's
is
easy.
on the parents' minds. And it does seem like you could win to legislators
Yeah.
if you're doing
Easily.
language changes rather than asking for money, because there may not be that much money.
Right.
I mean, so if we did an ask, maybe it's zeroed in on one item that's important.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And center on languages that are things that we'd like to see.
Would the reading endorsement be a language one also then, Ms. Carnegie? Because that's not really, we're not asking for money in regards to that. And the testing as well. Like I didn't even mention the testing, but I know everybody's concerned this year with testing and knowing the way we're starting. That's not I don't know if it's considered funding with the other
It would-
side of the
I don't know
house.
if I group
Save
that well as
money.
funding.
Theoretically.
What?
Wouldn't that save money theoretically?
Right. Depends.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I group that one as a funding ask.
I know.
But I do, so I guess, I mean, circling in on the funding, I mean, as much as Lake County is gonna ask for, the idea to paying our people, or giving it, for the state to give us the money that we need to pay our people, I'm not sure that that's gonna be the tipping point where the state will say, oh, okay, here you go.
Yeah.
Here you go,
Yeah.
school districts. Lake County's asking for that.
Yeah, and I should have.
But I would like to, I guess, circle back to the idea that if they're going to do a program, if they're going to continue the teacher compensation, that they remove the strings attached to that. There was this 80-20 rule, and now as a result of that, we've got, so I got an email from a 16-year veteran who's now going to be making the same as a first-year teacher in our district. All those years of highly effective evaluations, all those years of experience suddenly mean nothing. So that's where I understand the governor's aspirational goal to get to this 47.5, and that's fine, but we also have to appropriately compensate our veteran teachers. And so keep giving us the money, just take the strings off, so we can pay our people
Well, and
fairly.
couldn't we attach that to the same sentiment that you just expressed that they have in regards to the funding that the federal government's withholding from them, that they don't want, they're trying to hold this so that they can say, you don't have to use it for these specific purposes? Like, I imagine if we took our $700 million and said, we're not going to appropriate it, hoping that they're going to take the restrictions off. Like, they have got to feel some of the same kind of pressures that we're feeling with these dollars. Just let us decide. Let
But
us decide.
I would submit to you that if, again, going back to the equity, if we focused on that.
If it
that
was
would be-
equitable.
Right now, today, it'd be $12 million.
Right.
And this conversation we've had to this point, we've done nothing to address Mrs. Cronin's concern and our
Right.
service workers.
Right.
There aren't any dollars.
Right.
So the the bottom line is the equity compression is where, what is fair to come to us, and that we manage it.
So would it be more beneficial to put the equity compression up there and then list underneath it all the things we could do? I mean, wouldn't, it would remove all of these asks if we could just have this
Yeah,
one.
but then the challenge
It's money.
is are you gonna get?
No.
Like, it seems like the compression, they started out and we're dropping.
Right.
That are we gonna end up, they make it permanent, but true equity is 12 million. Giving us $1.7 million is a step in the right direction, but it's not equity.
Yeah, what I should have mentioned earlier as well is maybe the obvious, and that's a lack of revenue for next year. Revenue Estimating Conference has come back, and their estimates now are $2.5–3 billion for next year in a reduction. 5-year outlook, we don't get back to normal for 3 to 5 years. If you assume normal was the year before the pandemic. So yeah, there's going to be, far less money to spend next year than there was this year. And I will say, as it relates to the veteran teachers, coming out of last year's, or this past legislative session, there was, I think, a pretty genuine recognition on the vast majority of the legislature that they had created, while hitting a really cool aspirational goal and doing an amazing job for new teachers, they were, as a result, creating a compression with former teachers that weren't going to qualify for much, if any, of that raise. And so had none of this happened since March, I think there would have been a significant focus on that in the coming year of how to better reward longer tenured teachers. That may still happen, but I do think a lot of those sort of things they wanted to talk about are being jettisoned to deal with the reality of the present and the budget shortfalls thereof. But there is, it may be fleeting, but there is recognition in the part of the legislature that while they did a really good thing, they created another problem as a result, and they were going to look at that, and I hope they still do, even in the realities of the budget situation they find themselves in.
There was a decrease in that. You said 500 million for this upcoming is what is listed for to maintain the teacher raises?
They've got the 500 in there to maintain the raises, yeah.
But
Well, I
ours-
mean, they
Again,
have
just
to
in
do
the
that.
LBR.
Right.
I mean, I don't know what you would do if suddenly they say, sorry,
Right.
we're taking away.
Oh, what
Lake
would we
County
do?
portion was $7 million and
$7
something,
million, right?
you know? I don't know where you
Yeah.
come up with that $10 on the BSA.
Right.
is not
That ain't
gonna
gonna
do
get you
it.
there.
Right. I don't understand, because they knew this. They went into increasing base pay for teacher raises very well aware that they were creating a problem. So if they want to hold the responsibility of giving raises to teachers, can't we make it much more clear to them that they need to equitably distribute raises if they want to be in charge of raises? This is our, in theory, this is our job that they have decided that they will take over. So shouldn't the message to them be do a better job? If you're going to do our job, do a better job of it? I don't know, can that just be, can they fix it?
Well,
They
I
created
think what's already been
mass.
said is that they release the funding to allow the board to make the decisions on how it to be done versus send it down with the directions that they give where your hands are tied as a board. But in regards to what Mr. Mathias was talking about with Ms. Cronin, there's actually four pay grades that are below the minimum wage starting that we have in our school district. And one is only one step below the $10, but still there's 4 pay grades that hit that mark. So with this happening, and when would it go into effect, we really don't know right now if it passes. So financially, that would be something we'd have to be looking at. But I think also that one of our main priorities still needs to be the Guardian training program, that we make sure that is a part of our priority list as well.
Thank you.
I thought the amendment was for a $15 minimum wage.
It's in 2025.
So there's a
or
phased
something.
approach.
Yeah.
So right now,
Are you talking about
we're under the $10.
the constitutional amendment?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it would go, if passed, on January 1st, it would jump to 10 something. and then it would go up by about $1 every year until 2026. And then it's at $15 in 2026.
And to Ms. Cronin's point, I mean, regardless of whether or not that passes, goodness gracious, we've got a lot of employees.
I mean, we ought to run the numbers on what that would impact us.
That's what I was thinking, like, where's that money? That's another unallocated budget increase that we're gonna.
Yeah,
be interesting.
that one will not be the legislature's fault if it does pass.
No, but they'll have to give us
They'll
the
have
funding to
unintended
make it happen,
consequences,
right? I
right.
mean,
But the challenge is they don't.
they don't. So
Right.
there goes back to your
Equity.
discussion about the equity.
You know, the equity is $671 million for true equity. That, I'd rather that they focused on that, and they're throwing this 500 million over here, and then just let us do with the money. That would have made it would have been much more.
And if we said, I mean, if we were able to word that in such a way where it's not, we're not asking for more money, they have the money somewhat allocated already. So if it's just a shift in focus, I mean, it's the language, and I don't know, again, I'm gonna tell you, like, going back to their ask that they be able to do with their federal dollars what they'd like to do, we would like to do with our dollars what we need to do, and we know best what to do with our local people. The other thing, you said Senator Stargell was gonna have a big part in the allocation committee, is that correct? And so,
We expect her to play a major role in appropriations. We don't know what exactly that role will be yet, but we expect it to be
I heard her, I
significant.
did hear her when I was up there speaking on the floor about the number of districts and the equitable compression funding and then the raising the base salary. So I feel like she's in it, like she is in it, so she might be a really big advocate.
She gets it, and having her, in the last 2 years, she's been Education Appropriations Chair, which has been huge.
Right.
And she totally gets it.
That's good.
Okay. Cool.
It's cool, so what do we want to put? So the reason that we
Okay,
brought this
so-
forward too was because of the Lake Legislative Days coming up and they're starting to
Yeah.
form committees and,
That's to go through this draft, right?
Right.
Are we supposed to do that?
yes.
And do y'all need to be here for that, or, I guess? or-
I want to be here for whatever you need us here for.
Okay, well, just buckle up, because I
Well, I don't know, like I said, if we.
think everything is fine here, and just adding the guardian.
But should we not, can
And
we
the-
phrase it in a way where that equitable eliminate, no, where is it? The
Yeah,
increase
yeah,
in-
there should be a way to make that equity
Wait a
stand
sec,
out.
hold on, guys. Before we rephrase it, can I just ask, who is this, like, in the past, our legislative agenda list has always been, we sort of wrote it for the legislator, but are we really just writing it for Gray Robinson?
So
Do you know
not
what I mean?
necessarily. I can tell you that the alliance, help me. What are they an alliance of? Why can I not remember?
The Chamber Alliance?
Chamber
Thank you.
Alliance.
The Chamber Alliance, I'm like, this is not a city. Okay, the Chamber Alliance has taken a group to Tallahassee, and it's a group that is comprised of not just school-related people, like there's city and there's county, and they put these teams together because, as you spoke about, the economic driver, one of the big economic drivers is education. And so we kind of go together and divide and conquer. So we go meet individually. And I think one of the things that is helpful about it is they may have a different legislative connection than, say, we have, or than I have, or whoever's representing the district has. And so it's nice to be able to, first of all, go put a name to a face. These people are from Lake County. They're not just our lobbyists that we're hiring and we're advocating for this. But like I've gone with Al Minner from City of Leesburg, and Sandrine Moore has gone up there and advocated for education. And so it's just a different body that's coming forward to show the value of education in Lake County. So I know that is what spawned the conversation to have this delegated now, but it is also helpful for our lobbyists as they begin to talk about going back into session.
And just from a timing perspective, again, I think looking to the election, then probably an organizational session.
Right.
The real business of focusing on 2021 will begin to happen in December, January.
Right.
So there's a little bit of time. And of course, we're going to have at least one new member in your delegation that we're going to need to get up to speed on the things that are important to Lake County. And we'll do that as soon as the election's over.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we want to look at the, so you want to focus this document so that when whoever goes up this year to like legislative delegation has something to focus on?
That
makes
and,
sense.
that and for Gray Robinson,
That's fine.
yes.
And it may be, do you still do the county? Are y'all still the
Yes,
lobbyists
sir.
for the county? So it may well be that the safety and security, since the funds are actually on that side, that it's not on our plate. We're supporting the safety and security, but the ask is on their side. Does that make sense?
It
That
does.
makes
I don't
sense.
know that they've finalized their agenda, but that would make sense, yeah.
But you can help drive that a little bit, right?
We can certainly
No,
mention
we
it to
want it,
them.
we want it, but I don't think it falls on our
Right.
plate since we wouldn't get the funds.
Right.
I think it'd be nice to structure this in a way that says that if we were able to get the sustainable, or equitable and sustainable funds to meet the needs, we'd be able to do this, this, and this, which are our priorities, like pay our people the way that we feel like we should be able to pay them. We would be able to, we can't do those other three. What do you guys want to do about
I like that idea, Stephanie. Like if we said, if we had X funds, equitable funds, and local control of those funds, if we
Right.
said, then we could we could pay our teachers equitably. We could go, I like that idea.
we can increase the SEIU's point.
Because those are really our two big asks, are local control and funding with local control of that funding.
So just thinking about this from the state's perspective, though. Okay, so if they, were to hypothetically run with our idea that we just do this equity and we give everybody all the money in their BSA, well, then you'll get school districts across the state who will not use that for teacher compensation, which is clearly one of the governor's priorities, right? So I guess I don't want to run counter to that, because that's going to clearly be a situation where they're going to be like, well, no, because this is higher up than you all. So that's
Could we keep the language about
so I guess
using
we
it
can eliminate
for-
the idea that it's a bonus program, right?
Right.
Because that's gone.
That's
And about redirecting to the BSA, I'm even okay if they continue to allocate it specifically for teacher compensation,
Right.
as long as they just remove those strings from
Right.
that and allow us to
Right,
compensate the veterans. So,
compensate in what way we see fit.
yeah, but I still like the idea of,
Keeping it.
aside from that,
Salary.
here's all the other equity issues that we've got.
Right, I don't mind
Like
that.
SEIU.
It can be in a categorical, but we need to be able to control the categorical,
Take the
like we
strings
do
out.
other categoricals.
The challenge I think that you have, at least in my experience, is that the day-to-day House member or day-to-day senator has no clue what we're even talking about if you try and interact
Right.
with them. You know what I mean? Like, they don't, if they don't sit in education or they're not tied to the education appropriation, I've had at least 10 conversations where they went, that's not my area.
Yeah, no, there's a learning curve associated with this,
So-
and there's a relatively small group of folks that really understand the FEFP the way that the districts do.
Right.
And then on top of that, you're gonna have 50-plus new members of the legislature after November statewide. So that universe of people that get it shrinks even more, at least until a couple of years go by and they begin to get their footing.
Let me ask you this then, because whenever I go, I focus on the people that are in the education committees, period. I don't even go see them if they're not in the education committee. Would it be better to, because there's two, there's like education, then there's like K-12, and then there's like appropriations, and then there's like education appropriations. So which committee would you say to focus your time on when you go?
So in the Senate, higher ed and K-12 are combined in one appropriations committee. So
Okay.
that whole committee is the one you need. In the House, they're bifurcated. There's a
Right.
K-12 and there's a higher ed. So you want that K-12 appropriations committee. And then the full appropriations committees in both
Full too,
chambers
right?
are the ones. And then your delegation. There's really
Right.
nothing more important
Right.
than making sure that the members of the Lake County delegation understand and are articulate. They don't have to be all the way down in the weeds, but they need to
Right.
know what you care about and why. And that's, with all of those groups, that's where we come in, to make sure that they're educated on the things that we care about.
So is maybe, I think they've got probably an idea of what our highest priorities are.
Yeah.
At this point, do you think we probably kind of take this offline, wordsmith it with,
We can.
and bring it back for us
Yeah.
to give a final stamp to?
Yeah, we can do
I
that.
don't know if that's, right, you're our state person, right? Is it you, is it Ms. Owens to, with her wordsmithing powers?
And we
I
can
don't
work,
know if it's-
We can do it together.
at the risk of volunteering myself, that's what we're here for too. I mean, let us help you and your staff with what
Yeah.
that looks
Well,
like.
Have you seen this draft?
I think I've seen that
Okay.
one, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Then
just to
then if you
clarify-
could look at it based on this conversation and come back with where you think,
Yeah, we can get you
What needs
something
to
to
be.
look at your next meeting.
And
Perfect.
just to clarify, when I say take this offline, I don't mean 2 board members, 2 or more I mean, a board member with,
Yeah, that'd be great. And then we can bring it back, because we have some time. We're ahead of the game.
right?
That'd be great.
Before we finish, I just really want to say that I appreciate that after 4 years of working with our lobbyists, our lawyers, sorry, I really appreciate that we're like, actually, we are able to get into the weeds with you guys with the specifics on like the testing, the fixing, the tests for the kids to take for vocational, like that we can go into the weeds with you guys about that kind of stuff and about like the reading qualifications and that kind of stuff, because that stuff heavily affects our teachers and our kids and everything. And I feel like we have a real partnership now, and that is, I think, huge for us being able to affect change in the legislature. So thank you for that.
Well, we feel the same way, and thank you, Ms. Burns. And an example of that is, was the SAT, ACT timing and the test scores and that counting for Bright Futures. I don't know if it was you, Ms. Burns, or Ms. Luke, one of y'all had gotten a
Yes.
phone call from a parent really worried about what was going to happen. We were able to get in touch with the governor's office that day, and they were already working on what an executive order might look like down the road to make sure that those test scores were extended. I think it's now January. You can still take your test, get your score, and have it count for your Bright Futures. And so I use that as an example to say we want you guys to reach out to us when something hits your desk, and we'll always be working with Ms. Cornegie on how we can best deliver your message to the right places up in Tallahassee.
And just for clarification, I checked with Mr. Ward real quick. The funding comes to us for the Guardian Training Program through us to the Sheriff's Department. So it would be something we would really need to look into.
Oh, okay, so it's not through the sheriff. The training is, though.
The
Alex,
training
isn't
is
that?
done, but
Money
we
comes
pay
to us when
done
we
by
pay
the
the sheriff. Is that what you're saying?
I don't
That's what
think
he
so.
said.
No,
No, that's not correct.
they submit a separate application seeking reimbursement.
Scott's coming online.
This popped up.
Mr. Ward's coming online,
on
sorry.
screen.
So, yeah, they actually have to do the application through us to the Department of Education, and we have to submit the forms, receive the money from the state, and we have to tie that to the actual guardians that we hire. So, yes, we are involved in getting that money from the state.
No,
Thank
but
you.
stand by just one second, Scott.
Sure.
I'm not talking about, this isn't about the funding day-to-day of the Guardian. This is the new applicants coming in. And the new
This
applicants,
is for the training of the new guardians. Yes, it still flows through us.
it comes to us and then to the sheriff?
Yes, sir. We pass it to the sheriff once we get it.
Okay, thank you. Then we need
You're
to own that one.
That's .7.
And the dates for the Lake County Legislative Days are March 17th and 18th for this year.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay,
Very good.
any other comments?
No, I would reiterate, though, thank you guys for the work that you've done. I think that as a board member that sat here before we had lobbyists, we can absolutely see the fruits of your efforts, and we appreciate your partnership.
Thank
No
you.
doubt.
Appreciate that.
I just emailed you again the most recent draft to make sure you have that.
We'll work on it.
So, yeah, work with you to bring the new proposed draft either next week or the following week.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Excellent. So we will be moving on to 3.04, school fees audit with Mr. Mock.
I do too. Can we take five minutes to use the restroom, Dr. Burns?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, let's take a bio break.
Okay.
We'll be back at 50 after.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burns and School Board and Ms. Cornegay. I have 3 audit reports to bring to the School Board today for discussion. The first audit report is for the school fees. Here we go, with the school fees that I completed a few months back. I know there's been a number of discussions with the school board on this topic over the course of the last few months, and the policy has also been updated. So that was the end finding in this audit the policy needed to be updated, and Mr. Ward did that, and I believe through the Neola discussions of updating the policies, the school board already completed that. If you want to discuss further, I had a fairly long presentation, and it's behind the internal audit report that I provided to you, the presentation that I gave to the audit committee. And in that, there was, I know Ms. Luke had asked questions about how the funding was being spent that was being collected at the school, and this is hard to jump back and forth on, but I had done a little bit of work here. I'm sorry. And what I did was I took a couple of the different subjects like PE, the band, and I went in and looked at some of the high schools and some of the middle schools as far as where the money was coming from and what it was being spent on, because I believe that was what the question kind of was about. So as you can see up on screen now, I have the Eastridge High School PE fund from the internal funds, and it's for the 18-19 school year. At that time, I didn't have the 19-20 school year in full, so I just looked at the full year 18-19. And you can see here for Eastridge High School, they collected about $7,600 in PE uniforms and locker fees. And they also had some funding that they collected for the care prevention. That money, and then down below underneath, you can see what they spent during the school year, the money on. Uniform purchases were $4,000. They bought some padlocks, they bought some record cards and logbooks, they bought some tape and pre-wrap for the care prevention classes, and then they had some PE equipment, and then they had one non-sufficient funds for a check that wasn't able to be cashed. So that's how the money was being spent, and you can see the beginning balance was $2,000, and at the end of the school year, they obviously didn't spend all they collected, so the balance increased to $3,000. So did that kind of fall in,
This was a
Ms. Luke,
revenue
with what you,
source.
excuse me?
This was a revenue source. It didn't just pay for itself? It wasn't just,
That's kind of what the question was, and just through general discussions with principals, these accounts are used to, in some cases, reserve money for future spends, maybe like on a scoreboard, or in the case of the middle school at Windy Heights, they have a new gym floor that they spent money on. And they got that out of the general fund, as well as getting donations and some other sources for that money. That's the same thing that the principals are doing through most of the schools that we talk to, is there's no other source for funds other than to accumulate funds through these programs or through these activities to get things for like scoreboards that maybe are 20, 30 years old and aren't working too well anymore.
And I think this is, what we're looking at is a good illustration of what kind of began to prompt the questions in my mind about student fees. Because in this, and I don't know at this particular school if the students were required to buy the uniforms from the school or not, but I know there are schools where they were required to buy the uniforms and pay a locker fee, and then as a result of that, now the school has forced students, and they've got a monopoly on this, and they're forcing students into buying other equipment now, because now the students are paying for the PE equipment, and I say, gosh, isn't that not part of our obligation as free public school for students to not have that expense in their checkbook. Why is that not incumbent on us to pay? So it seems to me through this process we've identified that if schools are going to charge a fee for a supply, they can't mark it up and start using it on all sorts of other things that. Or if they're going to, let's say, continue in the path of selling uniforms, and maybe that is a fundraiser, the students are also able to bring in their own athletic clothes from home or something where they're not forced into this monopoly situation, right? That, I think, is what I gathered from our policies now.
Here's some other schools, if it'll go for, oh, I see, I have to do this. If I go down, you can see Tavares High School, where they basically just collected for locker fees, and then they did do some PE equipment purchases.
And that equipment, that's not maintaining the lockers, that's other stuff, right?
Yeah,
Because
can
the
I ask
lockers are
what
probably
kind?
already paid for.
What do we know what they're spending the money on?
PE equipment.
PE equipment would be basketballs, soccer balls, volleyballs, stuff like that. That
The
would be
kids-
the PE
So
equipment.
we were requiring PE fees so that we could buy balls. That's sad.
That's what they're using. It's not a PE fee, it's a PE locker fee.
No, but it's.
And then they're using that fee, the money's collected from that fee for their physical fitness equipment that they need, general use equipment.
This sort of example is not limited to this particular school. I think if you go throughout our district, you would find that these kids are required to buy this locker fee because they have to have a place to put their stuff.
Here's a big account, Lake Mineola High School. They started out with almost $11,000, continued to collect for the uniforms, and basically increased the fund by the end of the year almost to $12,000. So the question might be is, are they looking
Right, what are
to
they going
use
to
that?
use that money for?
Correct.
What
Is
is
a
the
new
goal?
scoreboard, or is there something else in the athletic area that they plan on spending that money for?
So how much did we give schools back in their general budget? Do you remember, Mr. Dodd?
I guess, this year it was the Raptor plus the school messenger system. I don't think that's a significant amount of money. That's not.
It was only like 13,000 total
a couple
over all of them,
$1,000,
right? So like they were raising a good bit of money this way, and we haven't refilled that. We haven't.
Well, from this it looks like they've only raised $1,200 because they bought the uniforms and then they sold the uniforms. Their profit here is only.
Something happened the year before, right? Like they started with $10,000.
Or it's an accumulation of
Right.
years. I mean,
Right.
you would have to go back and dig through
Right.
each year.
Right.
I mean, this could be 5-6 years worth of
Right.
accumulation.
Well, and I think about like Treadway comes to mind, just for instance, and they bought that big STEM lab. They put a big, but they had to fund that. That was not something that we would do. And so I know that they were trying to use every spare dollar they had to generate enough to purchase that for the students.
And the principals that I talked to, they said it can take 3 to 5 years or more to save for a new scoreboard.
So I guess it boils back to, though, are kids required to buy the scoreboard? It seems like they would
Right.
not be required to do that, that under, now I think we've kind of fixed this in our policy, that the cost can't exceed the school can't force the kid into buying something and make money off them. They can continue to move in the fundraiser approach and say, hey, if you want to buy the PE uniforms from us, they're marked up, and that money is going to be used to bolster our athletic department. Or you can buy your planner from us, but it's not going to be marked up. Or I think PE is just one example where we saw this happen. That
Here's some more. Here's the band. If you want, this is Eastridge High School band. Now, in this case, they spent a lot of money during the year, and they started out with $12,000 and ended the year with $6,000.
And that may well be a case of they were saving up to spend some dollars.
Well,
Yes,
now,
sir.
and is this one a case of, this is banned for credit, or is this banned as an extracurricular? So I think there's a distinction for me, you know, I think with extracurriculars, if you are participating, it's clearly voluntary, you're not taking the class for credit. Okay, you know, like athletics, there's gonna be a charge for that, there's gonna be a cost, and, you know, obviously you're gonna be encumbering some expenses.
This is where the marching band goes through and
But-
all the concert bands.
But like, you know, if you're taking, let's just say the class at a school, that's a different sort of situation.
It's still an elective, though.
But-
You don't have
But
to
you have to
take it.
take so many electives.
Right.
But I think also, though, part of being in the band, if you're in the band and football games, you're supposed to march, and then you're also required to go to the concerts and things of that nature there. So, I mean, the expense is there, and they're part of it it's part of their grade.
Yeah. I don't know how you separate that out.
Well, the idea of fundraising, back when I was in the band in 1972, that we were raising money for uniforms. I don't think that anything has changed dramatically.
And instruments
so.
and
In
I
those
mean,
years.
music
Or a trip.
arrangements
It could be a
and
trip, too. It
buses.
could be a-
Or
and-
a trip,
marching
the
trip.
Gasparilla we marched in.
Right.
That we had to pay for.
Well, our policy does not allow for fees or charges as a condition of attendance or participation for credit in any class, unless authorized by federal or state statute. And I don't know that federal or state statutes say that we can charge students for all these other things. I mean,
What do you want them to do?
I think this is where we have to make a distinction between extracurriculars and taking a class for credit. Like, if you're taking the class for credit, like, let's say go back to PE, we said, gosh, that was crazy that we were charging kids to buy the basketballs and soccer balls, or charging them to pay for a new gym floor, or charging them to pay for a new scoreboard. That goes beyond, I think, what is a reasonable expectation of a free public school. If you are in a band as an extracurricular, that's something you've chosen to do outside of school, and of course there are going to be many charges that go along with that. If you're taking band for credit in class and you're not part of an extracurricular band, so to speak, which I guess maybe largely mostly occurs more at the middle school level, then of course you'd be expected to pay for field trips and things of the sort, because that seems to be a standard. You know, like if a kindergarten class goes to the farm, you pay the $20 for the farm and the bus fee, right? But I think you start to get to the realm where you can't just charge them for school supplies that we're obligated to provide these people.
Where do we
We're
pull the
obligated,
funding
but
from?
do we? I mean, I agree with the policy, and I agree with not excessive, but I don't know that we're making up the difference so that we are making sure that the kids have what they need at school. That's my concern.
And
I've
will-
lost my signal, by the way.
Your what? I will tell you, one of the things that when I spoke to a couple of band directors just in regards to the charges, it was made very clear that the band fees, if they couldn't be paid by a student, that they would be covered. That if anybody had issues paying the $100 for a beginning band fee, that they just had to communicate with the band director. And they are also made aware that they will do fundraisers, and participation is required in the fundraisers. And I am the type that says, I'll just give you $100 if you don't make me participate in a fundraiser. But everybody's required to participate in the fundraiser, at least selling like 1 or 2 items per fundraiser so that they're help offsetting the cost. So I know that it was made like 100% clear that no child would be turned away if they couldn't afford the band fees.
And that's what a lot of people would say. But then what we've also found is that students are placed on fines lists for not paying, and then prohibited from any sort of other activities until they paid a fee required for a course for credit.
And so that would be an instance where I think that would be a school situation.
That's right, and so I think that's where some of this was trying to rein in, was that, trying to make that distinction here, that and what we've defined as school fees through our policy, and that I think there was a line in your report about suggesting that that they'd be communicated as donations in those courses.
Most of the middle schools said all fees were communicated to parents as a donation, not as a fee. but as a donation.
Right, so before this was done, before he went out and did his audit, you'd go on RevTrack, and you would find, if you just click from school to school, that, for instance, some schools would have a science lab fee. And the letter would come home from the teacher that says, this is a required $15 fee for our science lab. We can't charge a kid to go to science class, but that's what we were doing. And so I think the idea of this was to try to rein that in. So now I guess the next question is, what the communication piece looks like out into the schools from, because we've already adopted the policy, we've got the Neola policy in place that defines what a fee is and closes in this forced monopoly situation that some kids were in, and I think makes the distinction between extracurricular versus a credit activity. But, so how do we, I guess I'm just curious what that communication pieces look like to ensure that schools are not now buying gym floors because of forcing a kid to bring in $10,
So when the new policy went into effect, we did have a principals meeting. We went over the revisions to the policy and shared that with the principals. So they were very much aware of what the new policy states and what they can and cannot charge for. And I think if you'll go back and look at this year's handbook and things that they sent out, you should see the revisions reflected there.
Well done, thank you.
So we're defining a credit class as any elective.
Yes.
And so they cannot charge a fee.
They
I'm
can
wondering
collect
if
it
they're
as a
asking for
as a
donations
donation,
instead.
they could collect a fee, but they're not required to pay the fee. And most of them, for example, chorus band, it was to purchase a book of music and things that they would be provided, but if they wanted to keep it, if they wanted to take it home, then they would purchase it. So, but it was not a requirement for participation in the class. They would still be provided the book, but they just couldn't keep it. So it was those that were optional type things that we would still allow.
And I think the large portion of those fees are a T-shirt or a polo that you get to keep, so students would still pay for that because it's, or if students are going on field trips, I think that was a large portion. The choir is going to go perform at Disney World, and there's a cost to rent a bus. So it's just like all other field trips, students would still pay that. So I think some of the confusion came into place because maybe some schools would charge the fee up front because they'd say, oh, we're going to go on these 4 trips. And so they're just collecting really all the field trip money up front. So I think that was okay. It was, here, now we're going to use your fee and buy all these other supplies and things that, it's for the schools operating.
Would an instrument not be considered a supply? I mean, if I'm going to participate in a credit course and play the trumpet and I don't have a trumpet.
I agree with
They
Stephanie. I
usually
don't
have the
understand
ability to
how
rent
we're
them then.
What?
delineating.
They have the ability to rent them.
Well, is that not a fee? That's what I'm asking. So
Yeah.
are we violating our policy? And I'm not suggesting otherwise. We can't give every student an instrument. That would, we
But as
can't do
long as
that.
you have some other instrument for them to use, they may not get to play the one they want.
They don't. I can
Okay.
tell you 100% that if we told students that came to band that they did not have to purchase or rent an instrument, you could play from the storeroom of instruments that we have. You might have a 20-person band, maybe. For the bigger instruments, we'd probably have a lot of sousaphones or tubas.
Yeah.
And that's a concern that I have in this because they have to be able to purchase their instrument. And that would be a requirement for band, I
But
think.
Or rent.
the baritones sometimes are, but the tubas, the bassoons, things like that are not purchased. That's the schools.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Yeah.
there's a bit of a distinction on this one too, because now if the school were to say, we're requiring you to rent our tuba, then that's a different story versus you can go out and get, because,
They don't require them to rent the
well,
school
we
ones.
have so many schools
But
that
they do
require school
require them
uniforms,
to
but we
rent
don't
an
provide
instrument.
those. I'm sorry.
I'm like, I don't know. I couldn't hear you either,
Not
Mr.
seeing you
Dahl.
makes it
Sorry.
tough. But we have all these schools that require school uniforms, but we don't provide the uniform. Or you're required to have a calculator for math class, or you gotta bring in paper or notebooks or folders. I guess this one, I guess you'd probably argue that this is a supply versus that you can bring from elsewhere. Versus we're requiring you to rent our tuba and we're gonna mark it up so that way we can buy other stuff.
And I think, Mrs. Luke, that you have some courses where you have a limited number of students because you have a limited number of equipment to teach the course. Like the construction course, the construction academy or the cooking group? I mean, you have a limited number, you have a limited amount of equipment, so you can only teach so many kids that class. It's going to be the same with band. You have a limited amount of equipment, limited number of seats, so you can only teach a limited number of kids.
I think what she's saying is that traditionally, I played the flute. I rented my flute for 4 years, or I think eventually Dad got me one from a used store. But like, most kids rent their instruments if they have smaller instruments, and she doesn't want that to not be allowed by our policy. Is that allowed by our policy? Because we want bands that have flutes and drums and sousaphones. So is renting a flute allowed by our policy?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Well, then I think we're okay.
Yep. I think we're actually okay. We can move along.
I was fine. I was fine with the new policy.
Okay.
Ready? We'll
I
jump
can't
to.
see Ms. Luke, but I'm assuming she's good.
We'll jump to the next audit report. Last year, we completed an audit of the internal audit department. I did my self-assessment, but this year we did it slightly different. We had an independent validator come in and look over my self-assessment, as well as I think the validator talked to some of the board members. If you didn't get an interview, you probably received a survey. They also talked with members of management as well as other folks in the school district to come back with their overall assessment and recommendations that they made. As normal, I usually go through and look at my compliance with the internal audit, the Institute of Internal Audit's internal auditing standards. And they agreed that my compliance level was accurate. They also looked at the level of professionalism that I provide the school district, and then they looked at future directions for improvements. And with that, here were the recommendations of the independent validator. They recommended continued or increased partnership with the superintendent and senior management, industry-specific risk best practices and benchmarks, audit universe coverage, report recommendations, a post-audit survey, and that's done after each audit is completed. They had some recommendations around staffing, and then they had an overall, which this is more, wasn't for the internal audit department, it was more for the organization, is that we implement an enterprise risk management committee. And with that, I responded in the report as far as how I would follow up to each of these recommendations. Number 7, that's not something I can necessarily do. That's something that the organization needs to look at and see if setting that up would, how that would look and who should be a part of it, and obviously when it could be implemented, what's the best timing for that to be implemented. Any questions around any of these?
Nope, this looks good.
Good. Okay, we'll move on. Cypress Ridge construction audit. I'll just, as you know, I did what I normally do. I looked at the contract up front. I had meetings initially early on in the project. Well, it's about 50% of the way through, not quite, but it was about 50% of the way started when I had meetings with the construction company and our management as well attended that. I went over some things that I was looking for in the progression of the construction project as far as documentation and logs and information. From that, at the end of it, these were my findings. Well, these were the prior audit findings, because I know it's been asked how well we have implemented audit recommendations from the prior audits. One of my recommendations was owner direct purchasing, ODP, and we did implement that on this project, and there was a $41,250 savings. Labor burden rate, if you remember, I was recommending a much lower labor burden rate than it was done on the Eustis Heights project, construction project. And implemented on this project, we did have that lower labor burden rate, and I compared it from what we had on the Eustis Heights to this one, and there was a $31,221 savings on this project. Not to exceed, if you remember, I recommended in the general conditions, instead of paying a certain amount of money, that we not to exceed that amount. And in this case, we were able to save $2,225. Construction logs, I said mostly implemented. You'll see my recommendations here in a minute. General condition requirements were implemented. Overhead and profit fee not implemented. And the markup on the markup not implemented. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The overhead and profit fee was the big thing that I found on this particular project that was not properly calculated. And when I say not properly calculated, I'm reading what the contract says. It should be how it should be calculated. And then at the end, it should be trued up meaning to what we're actually spending on the project. And in this case, it was what was initially submitted was, first of all, not calculated properly with the proper elements in the calculation, but then it was not trued up to what the costing was at the end of the project. So I recommended that we recoup about almost $19,000 on that, and we were successful in recouping that money. Markup on a markup. I talked, actually the contractor saw my audit recommendations on this, and they didn't agree to this because they said it's not in the contract. And that's my recommendation is this should be in the contract. We should never have to pay a markup on a markup. And it just shouldn't be there. And that was a proper response from the construction manager is, hey, it's not in the contract, so I can do it. So let's put it in the contract so it doesn't happen. Small tool logs, I did get one at the end finally, but it took so long, I had to guess that they didn't keep it throughout the project. So that's why I said that for most part, the logs are maintained, but in this case, the tool logs was not maintained throughout the job. I felt they must have went back and put it together at the end. District maintenance of the construction documents. This was kind of a recommendation last time. I'm not sure if I made it in the report or not, but one of the things is I'm always requesting stuff that should be available, and since we have shared drives here at the school district, I felt a lot of that could just be dropped into the shared drive, and then I could easily just go out and grab those documents, and that we'd have little folders set up for each thing that I'm looking for. And then, the state auditor goes back, and they were just here. They go back and they do an audit on all these construction projects we do too. Guess what? They're asking for the same stuff I'm asking for. So if these were already set up, they would be available not only to me, but they'd be available to the state auditor as well.
And they've been set up now, right? With Four Corners, they have been set up.
I don't know that is
We'll
true.
get Mr. Carr.
I know what they're asking for is for some software that would be, then I would be able to access the software, which would be similar, that all then would be available. So I don't know if that's been approved yet or not. Do you know if you've approved
It
the
has
software?
been.
Okay. That's going to be great because, again, it'll give me that access I'm looking for.
Okay.
Thank you. And that was all on that.
Very good.
Any questions on the construction?
No?
Good job.
Thank you.
I'm just glad you caught some of these things on a smaller project before we gear up and do all these
Right.
big ones, so this was well timed. Thank you.
Yes, excellent work. I'm glad you found I'm glad we have an auditor on this project. So thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Excellent. Moving on to board member comments. Ms. Luke, do you want to start?
No, sure. I didn't have anything planned to say, actually. I appreciate the productive discussion with the legislative priorities this go-around and Gray Robinson, so that's it.
All right, Mr. Gamble?
Just want to say, Alex, you and your guys did a great job up here on this, getting this together in the timeline you had. And also Calvin, I understand since some electricians are somewhat over as well.
Help and Scott's team with building the custom tables for here as well.
So,
They did great with it.
looks good.
Yes, I love all the video upgrades and microphone upgrades. I think before we kind of fidget around with it, I think I don't know how old those microphones were, but so well done. Thank you. I appreciate that. And the other item, Superintendent, on Friday you send out these email kind of news flash sort of things. Those go to all the employees?
They do.
I think those are wonderful. I
Thank you.
love being able to, for all our employees to get this kind of the why on so many things, and just as, you know, everything we're doing as a district, they get the information straight from you. I think that's fantastic. Love to see it. Thank you.
I second. Go ahead, Mr. Matthias.
Yep. I actually have no comments. Very productive morning. Thank you.
Okay. Also, I love all the communication. I love the increase in communication. I think the more we can tell our teachers and staff, I think that things will move even more smoothly. I did want to also say thank you to everyone for the construction. It's beautiful. I love that the camera now pans back and forth. That's fabulous. And the sound was great this time. So thank you to all of our construction people. And thank you to everybody else. And I do not want to cut off the superintendent. So that's really all I have. Superintendent.
Well, you stole my my thank yous to Mr. Hankey and the team. They, I kept coming in every day and looking at the progress, and I tell you, they were working extremely hard. I don't think they took a break, so they were here early in the morning until late in the evening to make the deadline to have this ready for you all today. So we're grateful for all of their hard work. And also, we are celebrating, today is World Day of Bullying Prevention, so I see many of us got the memo to wear your blue today. Even Mr. Matthias has on his navy blue. So we're all celebrating bullying prevention today, and look forward to seeing the highlights of all the activities and lessons out in our schools from today's events.
All right. Do we have any comments from our attorneys?
Oh, ma'am.
All right. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.